Right, exactly. They say it's, yeah, and that's the 22%. So that's the mechanical thing, right? You take this price and divide it by the dollar price. This gives you the purchasing power parity. This is the observed exchange rate. You see that, in fact, you had to pay more Peruvian pesos for $1 than suggested by the purchasing power parity. That indicates that relative to the absolute purchasing power parity, this was undervalued. And in fact, if you want to have a number, you get the number by dividing this by that, and you get minus 22%. Now, the question is, do you agree with that? Would you agree with the statement that the Peruvian peso in January 2025 was undervalued by 22%? Right.
Then you would believe in the economic segment.
Right. But do you believe in PPP?
The empirical evidence doesn't support that, so I don't believe.
That's good. No, it's actually goes. We can be more specific. We can say, look, Balassa Samuelson argues that we should not expect the Big Mac price in Peru to be the same as in the United States. That's the underlying, that's the pillar, this assumption is the pillar of absolute purchasing power parity. So we would argue, with Balassa Samuelson in mind, we would argue, well, maybe the Peruvian peso was undervalued, but probably not by as much, because a part of this price difference can be explained by Balassa Samuelson effects. So again, we have to come back to this over and over again. The starting point of absolute PPP is the Big Mac should be the same. Price should be the same all over in different countries. Now, Balassa Samuelson argues we shouldn't expect that. We should expect things to be cheaper in poorer countries because of the effect that we discussed when talking about Balassa Samuelson. Now, this in turn implies that we shouldn't be surprised by the Big Mac in Lima being less expensive than the Big Mac in New York City. And so the bottom line is that the Peruvian peso was perhaps not as undervalued as it seems. And I'll go back to the Economist homepage in a second just to check what the Economist does. But before, let's look at Britain. Now, the Economist argues that the British pound was undervalued by roughly 1%. Would you agree with that? Well, the answer is, or do you want me to tease it out from you? Yeah, it's a small thing, right? It's not really mind-boggling, but we should. I mean, the point is, Britain and the United States have roughly the same living standards, right? It's not that Britain is a developing country and the United States is not, or vice versa. They are kind of both rich countries. So it's very hard to invoke Balassa Samuelson effects. So it's much easier to claim that the Big Mac should cost the same in London as it costs in New York City than claiming that the Big Mac should cost the same in Lima, the same in Lima as in New York City, right? So here I would say, yeah, maybe that's the case. The British pound was slightly undervalued. Let me scroll up and let me. Last thing, Argentina. the Economist argues that the Argentinian peso was in January 2025 overvalued by 20%. So the Big Mac was translated into US dollar units was more expensive in Buenos Aires than it was in New York City. Would you agree with the peso being overvalued? Now, is Argentina a super rich country relative to the United States? Used to be, yeah. They have a high inflation, but that of course, that generates this result, right? It's the high inflation, but the point to which I want to get is, you can make the case that when it comes to, for example, Norway is a rich country relative to the United States, right? Then maybe the Norwegian kroner is not overvalued. This is again by Lasse Samuelson. Switzerland is a rich country relative to the United States, so maybe the 38%, there is an overvaluation, but it's not that strong because this is a rich country by Lasse Samuelson. But to make a point that Lasse Samuelson effects are at play for Argentina is a hard sell, right? Because Argentina is not a rich country. Argentina should have a cheap Big Mac instead of having an expensive Big Mac. And now when you observe an expensive Big Mac in a poor country, so when you observe that this is positive for a poor country, then this indicates that there is an overvaluation. So the nice thing about this Big Mac stuff is,
like the nature of the Big Mac changes, it's become like luxurious status over there.
pardon? Can you say that again?
Become like the example that you mentioned yesterday, like for some people they even dress up to go into the McDonald's.
Might be right. Then of course this is something that you should also take into account. That in Buenos Aires the Big Mac is more expensive because of the market power of McDonald's. Then you would have to know more about what's going on the Argentinian fast food market. But if we assume that if we abstract from that, that's a good point after all. But if we abstract from that, then it's quite puzzling why a poor country's currency should be overvalued, right? And so there's no theory, right? So to go back, right, you can explain why the Big Mac in Honduras is cheaper than the Big Mac in the US. So you would argue this looks like an undervaluation, but in fact it isn't. Now for the Big Mac, for the Argentinian Big Mac, Argentina is not a super poor country, but it is a poor country by now. It is hard to explain why the Big Mac should be more expensive than in the United States. So that is an indication of an overvaluation. So the whole Bergonomics example is not completely useless, right? It allows identifying those instances where you can't invoke Lasse Samuelson. So let me go to the Economist homepage, right? And that's so. So this is the Argentinian peso, and it's overvalued by, where is it? It's 20.08%, right? Now, when we do the GDP adjusted index, okay, let's do that. When we do the GDP adjusted index, then we even get a 56% overvaluation. Right? So the when we look at, so this is the raw index. When we look at Switzerland Switzerland, the Swiss franc seems to be 38% overvalued. When we take the GDP adjusted index, well, it's 42% overvalued, which is interesting. So the Economist allows you to do the raw index and the GDP adjusted. And the GDP adjusted index is meant to control for those Balassa-Samuelson effects. So let's go down to Peru. Right, so this is the thing for Peru, an undervaluation by 21.8%. If we do the GDP adjusted thing, my hunch is, and I haven't checked before, my guess is that this negative number will still be negative, but it will be less negative. It will be closer to 0. So where's Peru now? Oh yeah, right. So if you adjust for GDP levels, then there's a correction. Now I saw that there's Vietnam in the sample, which is super interesting. So let's check what the Economist has to say about the Vietnamese dong. Where was it? I thought I found it somewhere. Did you see it as well? So here it is. So the assessment of the Economist is that the Vietnamese dong is undervalued by 48%. And please bear in mind what that means, right? If something's undervalued, there is an appreciation just around the corner. That's the idea. A market correction. Now, of course, when you do the GDP adjusted assessment, then you get still an undervaluation, but by 33%. So there's still something where the Vietnamese dong is, quote unquote, cheap, too cheap relative to the US dollar, but it's not, the undervaluation is not as strong as suggested by the first take. So I encourage you to go to the Economist homepage. I'm not marketing the Economist, right? That's not my goal, but it's very nice to play around with that and to get those to see those adjustments. Good. Right. And here you have different years, and you have actually you can do different PPPs vis-a-vis different currencies. So there's quite a lot of things to do. And then, of course, by the end, they want you to buy a subscription, but you don't have to. Good. So this was problem 3 in the 6th problem set, and let me now use half an hour. Maybe you want to let's take a 7-minute break, right? Just you want to go to the bathroom or whatever, or just walk around, because I've kept you here for roughly 2 hours now. So if you want to, so I'll come back at 3:30, and then I'll lecture for another 30 minutes. Okay. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. probably at 3:30 because I'm a member of a search committee in Frankfurt. And usually when we have these search committees in Frankfurt, there's be someone from Mainz on board because we have that partnership, and they will make a very important decision tomorrow, and so I have to join the online meeting. And I thought there would be no problem because it starts at 10 a.m. in Germany, and I said, okay, I can join, but the time difference between Germany and Vietnam is usually 6 hours, but pardon? We have daylight savings time, so we have shifted. Now in Germany, it's not 10. What is it? It's not 10:30. It's no, it's not. It's not 9:30. It's 10:30, right? So they've shifted the time that was on the weekend when I arrived here. That is something that is unknown to you, because in Vietnam the day starts at 6 and it ends at 6, and that's all year long. Now in Europe, in summer the day starts at 4 and it ends at 10 p.m. And in winter the day starts at 8 a.m. and it ends at something like 5 p.m. because we are, in the north. And what people said is, okay, if days are longer in the summer, then why not shift the time 1 hour ahead? It's called daylight savings time. That's not just a German thing. The other European countries do it as well. So this reduced the time difference between Germany and Vietnam by 1 hour. So it's just 5 hours currently. Little detail on German habits. And so since the meeting starts at 10, I said I will probably not be there from the very beginning. Now, guess who's the chair of the committee? It's Michael Binder. Sometimes I think there's two Michael Binders because he does so many things that's just amazing. All the stuff he organizes and does. Now this doesn't look very good. Let me close this. This doesn't look very nice. So let me open it again. There we go. It's not that, the university system in Frankfurt and Mainz just consists of Michael Binder and me. There's lots and lots of people, but Michael volunteered to chair this committee, which is actually, search committees are always very hairy issues because people have different interests and want to see different people being hired. And you need someone who's has a good standing and is very diplomatic. Good. Okay, so let's go into the last 20-something minutes of this afternoon, and thanks for bearing with me. We did a lot of stuff, but we still have to do a lot of stuff. And we moved beyond PPP quite a bit, right? And now the next thing we're going to do, and this will be really the next thing, we turn to the traded goods basket. Now, this morning, we've just said, okay, we impose the law of one price for all traded goods. And so we set this part of the equation 0. And now I want to convince you that things are not that easy. And this will be important also because this will bring us in touch with one variable that we haven't met so far, namely the so-called terms of trade. The terms of trade is a super important variable, and it's super important whenever we talk about competitiveness, because it's the relative price of exports over imports, or of imports over exports. So, now recall, the CPI is a bundle of traded or non-traded components, right? That's what we did this morning. Just to remind you, we have a traded bundle and we have a non-traded bundle in the home country CPI, and we have a traded bundle and a non-traded bundle in the foreign CPI. I wonder what's is on that slide, right? Now, we make the implicit assumption that there are identical weights of traded or non-traded components in both countries. So the gammas, it's not a gamma H and a gamma F, it's the same, which is an assumption, which we could relax. Now, here's new stuff. Suppose the domestic economy produces one good, which is good H, and let's call it a hat, right? And suppose that the foreign economy produces the foreign good, and let's call it the football. And suppose that the only thing that people consume in terms of tradables are hats and footballs. Good. Now, the traded goods bundle in the home country is a combination of the hat price in the home country and the football price in the home country. Now, how do we read that? Read that as follows. This is price of good H, call it a hat, in the domestic H economy. That's what you produce in the H economy and what you also consume. And PTFH is the price of F, good F, let's call it a football, in the domestic economy. Importantly, the traded goods bundle has a domestic component and an imported component. So you, in hat country, in country H, you produce hats and you consume hats, and you import footballs and you consume footballs. Now, in the foreign country, these guys consume hats and they consume footballs. Now, this is the price of the hat in country F, and this is the price of the football in country F. So you have two subscripts, one indicating which is the good that we're talking about, the second one indicating which is the location where the price prevails. So this is FF because we are talking about country F. This is HH because we're talking about country H. Now this is the hat price in football country. This is the football price in football country. Okay? So just to complete. Now please note the weight of a hat in country H is theta H. Now this fellow is called theta. The weight of the hat in football country is theta F. And now we allow for the possibility that theta H is different from theta F. This is important. Doesn't have to be the case. It's between 0 and 1, but we allow for the possibility that maybe people in hat country devote a larger share of their consumption to hats, and people in football country devote a larger share of their consumption to footballs. So, when we spend about half an hour in front of a piece of paper, and that's the fourth problem on the problem set of today, which I told you to postpone, then we get this equation. So tomorrow I will ask you to actually derive this. It's kind of fun because it's just about juggling with expressions. By the end of the day, you get this. Now, this is the most